that don't need to be living there.
Yeah, because they're proving it as soon as they get out.
She's the first black woman on the Supreme Court, and she's determined she won't be the last.
My parents had raised me to believe that I could do anything I wanted to do.
Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson on Person to Person.
Will shake me. No enemy will intimidate me.
You don't fix human failures by giving the humans more money. You fix human failures by getting new humans to do the job.
Any missile or drone strike, any critical incident in the energy system could lead to a nuclear disaster. A day like that must never come.
Hello, everyone. I'm Major Garrett in Washington. Welcome to America Decides. If nothing else, we here at America Decides know how to count and read a map. So here you go. 41 days to Election Day. Not incidentally, voting has already begun in some states. Vice President Harris was in Pittsburgh today. Former President Trump in North Carolina. The Vice President unveiled new economic proposals in her fourth trip to Western Pennsylvania since launching her campaign. Trump pushed, as you might expect, his America First agenda, doing so at a plumbing manufacturing plant just outside of Charlotte, his second visit to North Carolina in the last 5 days. And we are learning about renewed threats and assassination plots against the former president from Iran. Trump and his campaign have been briefed on this topic by U.S. intelligence officials. That is where we start tonight, and our Scott McFarland joins us from Capitol Hill. Scott, catch us up on the latest regarding Iran and these threats.
Yeah, the Trump campaign confirms and actually reported first last night that their team and the former president have been briefed by the Office of Director of National Intelligence about potential Iranian plots to assassinate him and to destabilize American politics at this inflection point with about a month and a half until Election Day. This comes after 2 assassination attempts over the past 2.5 months, but there's been no indication of any connective tissue whatsoever between those 2 attempts and Iran. But it also is not happening in a vacuum, is it, Major? It's happening amid this concern the U.S. Secret Service needs more money, needs more manpower, needs better equipment, better training, better communications to deal with these threats against Donald Trump and their other protectees. And one note from a newly issued U.S. Senate report came out at 5 a.m. Eastern time today, that there was intelligence received just ahead of Donald Trump's Butler rally about a possible threat, a destabilizing threat. The July 13th Butler rally, Major, was the first one involving a post-president Donald Trump in which he got a counter-sniper team assigned. That counter-sniper team in Butler, Pennsylvania may very well have saved his life and many other lives that day. There may be some connective tissue between the deployment of that counter-sniper team July 13th and the threats being received ahead of time.
Scott, I know you have an interview with one of the lawmakers most interested in boosting funding for the Secret Service. We'll get to that in a second, but I want to play for our audience some sound from former President Trump today about what he regards as maybe a lack of emphasis by the Biden administration to Iran about the threats around him and what he might do if he were similarly positioned. Let's listen.
If I were the president, I would inform the threatening country, in this case Iran, that if you do anything to harm this person, we are going to blow your largest cities and the country itself to smithereens. We're going to blow it to smithereens. You can't do that.
Scott, are those sentiments shared in any way that you can detect on Capitol Hill by Trump-supporting Republicans?
What we heard out of Trump-supporting Republicans today on this topic was about the need to more robustly protect Donald Trump. They're making this argument that he needs the same level of protection he would have had when he was president and that President Biden enjoys right now. And to a degree, that argument is succeeding. The U.S. House, as the evening began here in Washington, passed a spending bill that includes more than $200 million for the Secret Service to better protect its protectees. What's more, a bill to make equal the protections given to presidential candidates and the president passed overwhelmingly unanimously in the U.S. House, and then unanimously, by unanimous consent, in the U.S. Senate. Something passing unanimously this close to an election is unheard of. So there seems to be some unanimity to the need and the idea here that there is a need to get more protection for Donald Trump, Vice President Harris, and the other protectees in this moment of potential international interference. Take a listen to one of the sponsors of the House bill, Mike Lawler, first-term Republican from New York.
It ensures that the Secret Service provide the same level of protection for the former president as they do for President Biden, which, given the fact that either Donald Trump or Kamala Harris is going to be president of the United States come January, it is imperative that we ensure their safety and well-being and that the same level of protective detail is provided, especially after President Trump was a victim of not one but two assassination attempts.
The Major, let me just button up a few loose threads here. The defendant in that alleged second assassination attempt, Ryan Ruth, appears in court Monday to face formal charges. And oh, by the way, Donald Trump has on the schedule a trip back to Butler, Pennsylvania, October 5th.
Scott McFarland on Capitol Hill. Thank you, as always. Robert Costa and Nancy Cordes join us now. Robert is in Mint Hill, North Carolina. Nancy is in Pittsburgh. So, Nancy, I want to start with you. Pittsburgh, Western Pennsylvania, yet again for Vice President Harris. Not only an emphasis geographically, but there's some new economic proposals that were distributed today. Tell us about those.
Right. So she talked about wanting to promote innovation in manufacturing, but her main focus here in Pittsburgh, in this battleground state, Major, was her overarching economic philosophy, trying to lay out for a public that is still learning about her and her proposals exactly how she would address economic challenges as president of the United States. So she argued that she is a pragmatist, that she would not be guided by ideology alone, and that she would take great ideas from all corners. Essentially, Major, what she's trying to do is peel off the labels that Donald Trump has been trying to stick on her, that she's a socialist, that she's a capitalist. He even called her yesterday a tax queen. She's arguing that she actually wants to cut taxes for the middle class, that she wants to provide more assistance to startup businesses, to people who are trying to buy their first home. And she's arguing that she isn't guided by liberal principles solely when it comes to the economy, that she'll take ideas, if they're good ones, wherever they come from, and that she will commit to trial and error until she gets it right.
Robert Costa, turning to you in North Carolina. The Trump message on the economy, not only trying to label Kamala Harris, but saying there has already been a certain amount of trial and error.
Major, great to be with you from the battleground, North Carolina. I was covering former President Donald Trump earlier today at a manufacturing site outside of Charlotte in the Charlotte region. And it's evident that he's coming back to his core themes from the 2016 campaign and the 2020 campaign in this final stretch in 2024. He's talking about economic nationalism, about putting forward tariffs on American corporations who choose to move abroad for manufacturing or for any kind of business purpose, and having punitive tariffs be at the core of his economic argument. And it's winning some support, especially among Republicans in North Carolina and elsewhere, who like to see that Trump-style economic approach taken, not just to talk about tax cuts, but to talk about appealing to working voters by putting trade front and center. And that's what makes Trump so different than most traditional Republicans who usually would only talk about extending the Trump tax cuts. Trump sees an opportunity to cut into the Democratic base, especially among union members in the South and the industrial Midwest, by focusing once again on trade.
And Robert, we talk frequently with you and enjoyably about your life growing up in Bucks County, Pennsylvania, eastern Pennsylvania. I know this is not necessarily your bailiwick, but I just want to know what you think about or what the Trump campaign regards as Harris's emphasis on Western Pennsylvania.
Harris knows that, and this is based on my conversations with her advisors and her top strategists, that she needs enormous turnout in Philadelphia and Pittsburgh because there is an expectation on the Democratic side that Trump's going to get big turnout in Western Pennsylvania. by focusing on things like antitrust issues, going after big corporations, by talking about not taxing on tips, echoing the Trump position, by talking about working people, locking arms with union leaders like Shawn Fain and others. Harris is trying to make sure that Trump's not going to walk away with that quiet, centrist union vote in places like Western Pennsylvania. So her going to Western Pennsylvania isn't some kind of belief that she's going to win all regions in Pennsylvania, especially that one, but that she needs to counter Trump on immigration, on the economy in that part of the state, because if she can run up the score in Philadelphia and keep him relatively muted and soft in some counties in Western Pennsylvania, especially those collars around Pittsburgh, then she can win the state. And it's very hard when you talk to Harris people for her to have a map to the White House that doesn't run through Pennsylvania. And if it doesn't run through Pennsylvania, it's going to almost have to run through North Carolina and Georgia. And that's why you see such an emphasis on those states as well.
Nancy, turning to you about another question of geography. The vice president is considering, we are led to believe, a visit to the U.S.-Mexico border.
She is, and believe it or not, Major, this would be her first visit to the border since 2021. This has always been a sticky issue for her. Obviously, Republicans are going after her on this issue now. Our polling shows that she trails Trump by double digits when it comes to handling of immigration. But she's going into the belly of the beast. She's going to be holding a campaign event near the border in Arizona on Friday. And she's going to argue that actually the number of border crossings has dropped sharply in the past few months since the Biden administration, of which she is a part, imposed a tough new asylum policy. And she's going to argue that it was actually Trump who brought an end to what would have been a major bipartisan achievement on Capitol Hill, a big new compromise immigration bill. And so it'll be very interesting to watch the optics and also to listen to what she has to say in Arizona as she works to diffuse something that has been really one of her biggest and most difficult issues to tackle on the campaign trail.
And Robert, picking up on that point, economics and immigration seem to be the core messages as Trump looks toward the finish line.
There's no doubt about it. And as you know, Major, there's such a history of this in both parties and seeing how these issues are intertwined, because when you go to a union hall, as you have many times and I have many times, you often meet workers who say that immigration levels, put aside undocumented migrants, legal immigration levels, many workers have told me in the past few decades, they would like to see them limited in some way, capped or lowered, because the idea among many working Americans that you're in any way increasing the working population, especially for some of these industrial jobs, that's competition. They want to make sure they're not facing more competition in a tough economic atmosphere. So that's why immigration and the economy in places like North Carolina and Western Pennsylvania and all parts of the country are so often linked together, because working people those are the real swing voters, in my view, this time around. They link those issues. They don't see them as kind of a separate front. They don't see the discussion about the border as some kind of individual, singular policy fight. It's part of the economic fight and how they feel economic pain and how they cast responsibility for it, whether it's positive or negative.
Robert Costa and Nancy Cordes, as always, thank you very much. And a quick programming note. I promise I will properly pronounce that. Note. Join us here on CBS News 24/7 early. And by early, I mean 4 p.m. Eastern on October 1st for our special vice presidential debate edition of America Decides live from New York. CBS News, as you might have heard, will moderate the only vice presidential debate, and we will bring you coverage on that debate all evening long. Congress gets ready to leave Washington, but first it has to pass a stopgap funding bill for the federal government. Our Nicole Killian is on Capitol Hill with the latest on that. You are streaming America Decides.
These are the stories
1, 2, 3, go!
Of we, the people.
We're trying to generate our own hope.
It's a huge deal.
I'm enabling them to feel valued.
Eye on America, weeknights on the CBS Evening News with Norah O'Donnell.
I had progressively fallen deeper into the world of online sports betting.
The risk is the rush.
What do you think is driving the spike in popularity?
I think it's legality.
If it's legal, I'm going to use it. There are ways to bet when you are 18.
We've created an epidemic of child gambling.
You can't walk into a male dormitory in a college campus without sports betting happening.
It's America's most neglected problem.
I used sports betting as a way to escape, when in reality, I'm choosing self-destruction. Whatever I had left, it was gone.
The purpose of the industry is to get you to play to extinction. And that means until all your money is gone.
Go to the ends of the earth. Reach for the stars.
Yeah, I just took off. That kind of thing.
Oh, that's pretty good. Because there's always something new under the sun on CBS Sunday morning.
America Decides is your place for fact-based, unbiased reporting.
At the White House, at the Capitol, on the campaign trail. What do you say to those in your party?
Any cracks in the Republican Party?
Our reporters and our anchors travel the country talking to voters like you
about the issues that matter most.
Immigration is really a factor right now
that are going to be driving your decisions.
What would you say to those who say, look, that's just democracy at work?
Listening to you and bringing your voice into our coverage.
I want a strong, proud America.
Is democracy on the ballot in 2024?
Let us help you decide.
America Decides. Stream our expanded one-hour program Monday through Thursday at 5 p.m. Eastern.
Exclusively on CBS News 24/7, the streaming home of CBS News.
People with developmental disabilities were once sequestered by the hundreds of thousands in institutions.
Many of our fellow citizens are suffering tremendously because lack of attention, lack of imagination, lack of adequate manpower.
Disability activists have since torn down barriers blocking them from living at home or in the community.
We conclude that Title II of the ADA requires states to provide community-based treatment for persons with mental disabilities.
But of the 16,000 people who remain in state-operated institutions, half are in 5 states, and Illinois is one of them.
I don't want to live in the institution. It makes me feel discriminated against.
Do you think there are people living in institutions in Illinois that don't need to be living there?
Yeah, because they're proving it as soon as they get out.
Welcome back to America Decides. Good to have you with us. The House has just passed a short-term funding bill that will keep the government running through December 20th. The Senate is expected to vote on that bill this evening. The package did not include the so-called election security provision known as the SAVE Act that former President Trump has insisted Republicans tie to this measure. Our Nicole Killian joins us now from Capitol Hill. So, just to state the obvious, Nicole, it is not a problem in this country for undocumented immigrants to vote. It doesn't happen in anywhere near the numbers, suggested or otherwise, from proponents of the so-called SAVE Act. Just to clarify that, that's not in this stopgap spending bill that the House passed. How much help did Speaker Johnson in the end need from Democrats to get this done?
Well, he certainly needed help from Democrats, more so than Republicans in his own party. You know, we saw a much bigger split among Republicans. Democrats almost unanimously supported this package in terms of those who were in attendance, whereas there were some 80 Republicans that did not. So that just gives you an indication of kind of where the chips landed. And Minority Leader Hakeem Jeffries has made clear that time and again, Democrats have to come to the aid of Republicans and Speaker Johnson to get just basic funding packages passed because there isn't enough support within the Speaker's own party. So that's what we saw transpire again with this approval of short-term funding. The question is, will there be yet another funding fight at the end of the year, right around the holidays?
Translation, the majority, effective majority in the House, at least on matters of this kind, appears to be the Democrats. What will happen and in what timeline in the Senate?
Well, the Senate is expected to take this up in short order, but, you know, the bigger hurdle or the bigger lift was in the House. So now that this is cleared, it's almost inevitable that the Senate will move forward with this package. In fact, Leader Chuck Schumer even expedited this vote by securing a time agreement, which will allow the Senate to take this up relatively quickly.
Nicole, you spoke to Michigan Democratic Senator Gary Peters, who leads a Senate panel that found multiple failures committed by the Secret Service leading up to the first assassination attempt against former President Trump. What did he tell you?
Yeah, that's right. He is the chairman of the Senate Homeland Security and Governmental Affairs Committee, which conducted this investigation and launched this investigation into Butler right after it happened. They had the director of the Secret Service testify before the panel in late July. And so this was an interim report that the committee put out that found sweeping failures on the part of the Secret Service, whether it was planning, communications, law enforcement coordination, and other breakdowns that likely contributed to the assassination attempt against the former president. Take a listen to what Chairman Peters told me. What do you believe was at the core of these failures?
Well, there certainly were a lot of failures, and every single failure was preventable. And had any of those failures not happened, we could have avoided this horrible incident. But it all starts with the planning, inadequate planning. There wasn't a comprehensive plan that really took into consideration that you had a building that was not being sufficiently guarded. It had a direct line of sight to the stage with the former president. That should have been a priority for the Secret Service to make sure that they secured it. And it wasn't. And then what we found is that there was a lot of finger pointing. The Secret Service said, well, it was local law enforcement. They were supposed to do it. Local law enforcement said we weren't told to do that. We didn't necessarily even have the manpower. But ultimately, that's the responsibility of the Secret Service, is to make sure that a shooter does not have a clear line of shot.
There were also some basic malfunctions of equipment, radios, drones. How was that possible?
Yeah, the equipment malfunctions, like the drones, was particularly significant. So we know drones are a significant threat that we have to be concerned about in all sorts of events. There is counter-drone capabilities that the Secret Service has, but on that day, it wasn't operating properly. In fact, the witness talked about being on a tech line trying to solve the problem for several hours. And during that time, the shooter actually had a drone up in the air, was surveilling the area. And had the counter drone been operating, they would have been able to detect that.
Senator Peters told me that their probe continues and that they are looking to interview other individuals associated with this incident. And he also didn't rule out the possibility that the committee could expand its probe into looking into that second assassination attempt against the former president at his Florida golf club. The Secret Service, for its part, said that the findings from this interim report mostly align with its own internal review that's been underway, and said that it understands the weight of its mission. Major.
Nicole Killian on Capitol Hill, thank you very much. Now to the Middle East, where the Israeli military intercepted a missile launched from Lebanon into central Israel. This happened Wednesday morning. Chris Livesay has more from Tel Aviv.
Well, in a major escalation, Hezbollah fired a surface-to-surface missile in the Tel Aviv area, something that they have never done before. Hezbollah said it was aiming at the Mossad, that's Israel's foreign intelligence. They also said it was in retaliation for a week of just outright calamity for the Iran-backed group, starting with those exploding pagers and beepers, followed by the targeting killing of its military leadership, and now these airstrikes concentrated in the south of Lebanon. Now, the big fear is that Hezbollah's backers, Iran, will join the fight, and that the U.S. could get dragged in as well to help its ally, Israel. So the Biden administration is working on a new diplomatic solution for a pause in the fighting, both in Lebanon and in Gaza, to resuscitate those otherwise failed negotiations to release the hostages in exchange for a ceasefire. That's according to Reuters and Axios. But in the meantime, Israel is keen to keep up the momentum, and now there are talks within the military about escalating this into a ground invasion in Lebanon. So today, the chief of Israel's Northern Command said, quote, "We need to change the security situation. We need to be very strongly prepared to enter Lebanon in a ground maneuver." Major.
Chris Livesay, thank you very much. Here's a question. Can Vice President Harris follow in President Biden's footsteps and keep Georgia blue in 2024? We'll take a look at our latest numbers out of Georgia. That's next. You're streaming America Decides.
Bright, shiny faces.
When you wake up in the morning, we want to be your go-to team.
Nate has one of the quickest minds I've ever seen.
Tony has a way of making people feel comfortable.
Gail has this unbelievable knack to ask the question that you're asking at home.
I've been told I could talk to a tree, and that's pretty much true.
I don't go to work in the morning. I go for coffee with my two good friends, and we talk about the world.
Your morning routine just got better. CBS Mornings, weekdays at 7.
It didn't seem like anything could happen, because nothing ever happens in East Palestine, but it did.
Authorities released toxic fumes from 5 derailed train cars.
Residents, please evacuate.
Acute bronchitis due to chemical fumes.
Did you ever have these problems before the derailment?
No, ma'am. This neighborhood's not safe no more.
We can assure the community that there's not vinyl chloride entering their communities.
Then why are there so many people feeling these various symptoms of bloody noses or difficulty breathing, bronchitis?
That's a hard question to answer.
We're talking about one of the most blatant releases of a mixture of some of the most toxic chemicals that we've seen in America.
I feel like now I have a duty to warn other communities. If my daughter has to watch me die of cancer, at least it saves someone else. This case.
It's like a screenplay, something straight out of Hollywood.
But it's not fiction. It's 48 hours.
Human remains found this week.
4 families shattered.
There's no physical evidence.
The mystery would haunt investigators for years.
There's some questions that have to be asked and need to be answered.
Like a John Grisham novel.
A gripping true crime original. 48 hours. Now streaming on the free CBS News app.
Stories that inform.
Or you can be really old at 60, and you can be really young at 85.
Inspire.
How do we unlock the power within ourselves to be who we want to be?
And brighten your day.
The best part of fame is making people feel good. Always send the people home happy.
Make every day a little more like Sunday morning.
Here comes the sun.
Stream now on the free CBS News app.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to our Dragon capsule here in space.
Sightseers in space, the thrill of a lifetime.
Seeing the Earth from space, it was so exhilarating.
But the risks that come with the territory.
There have been 4 fatal accidents. That's a 1% fatal accident rate.
Might make you look before you launch.
If you had 1 out of 100 airplanes falling out of the sky, we'd have a public crisis.
Space tourism, now streaming on the free CBS News app.
Welcome back to America Decides. Stop me if you've heard this before. The presidential race is very close in Georgia. How close? Well, a brand new CBS News poll finds former President Trump 2 points ahead of Vice President Harris. As you might recall, Georgia narrowly went blue for the first time in decades in 2020. Our CBS News Deputy Director of Elections and Data Analytics, Kabir Khanna, joins us now. Kabir, break down the numbers for us.
Well, Major, I'm focused on Georgia this week for 2 reasons. One is that it has one of the biggest electoral hauls among the battleground states, second only to Pennsylvania. And now, also, as you said, it's a very competitive state these days. We have Trump with a 2-point edge that's well within the margin of error. One cool thing that we can do with the CBS News Battleground Tracker that you won't get in a typical poll is look at data at a much more granular level. What I've done here is produced an estimate of Harris's support and Trump's support in each of Georgia's 159 counties. And what you'll see is a familiar pattern. Donald Trump is running up the score in smaller rural counties in the southeast and northwest of the state, while Harris is doing better around major cities. Let me point your attention to one set of counties in particular, and that's the Atlanta metro area and the suburbs around Atlanta. You may remember this was crucial to Biden's win in 2020. He ran up the score in Atlanta, and he saw a shift to the left of a few points in Atlanta's diverse growing suburbs. What we find today is that Harris is winning these counties, but she's not quite meeting those margins that Joe Biden saw in 2020. Let me give you one example. If we go to DeKalb County, we currently estimate that Harris is at 76% support there. So she's winning it handily by 3-1. But by comparison, Joe Biden won this county, which is full of black voters, by 84%. So in a race this close, a lot of factors can flip the result, from small shifts in turnout to small shifts in support. If Harris were to get a little bit closer to Biden's numbers in 2020, including matching his support with black voters who make up a third of the electorate, she would pull even statewide, Major.
And Kabir, what did we find in terms of voter importance on issues or the idea about how secure the election will be in Georgia writ large?
So we see a familiar dynamic here. Both the economy and democracy are top concerns among voters in this state. First of all, on the economy, Georgia voters are still feeling the effects of inflation. Many feel that they're worse off than they were before the COVID pandemic. Many feel that housing in their part of the state is unaffordable. And voters who feel worse off are supporting Donald Trump in large numbers. That's a big part of why he has that edge statewide. At the same time, as you can see here, almost as many voters statewide say they're very concerned about whether the U.S. will have a functioning democracy when they think about the next few years. This group is helping keep Harris competitive statewide. They're going for her by 8 points. We also asked folks what they thought about the new rules that the Georgia Election Board has voted on, including a requirement to hand count ballots on election night. Well, most people feel that this will cause delays in finding out who wins Georgia, and they might be onto something. Rule changes aside, we should be very patient in finding out who wins a state like this when it's such a tight margin, Major.
Kabir Khanna, thank you very, very much.
It was the greatest honor in the world sitting behind the Resolute desk as President of the United States, I loved it, but it sounds corny, but I love my country more.
President Biden's view of his decision to step aside and why he thinks Vice President Harris is the best woman for the job. That's coming up next. You're streaming America Decides.
Washington is the seat of power. National security, foreign policy, global economics, every story comes through Washington in some way. We bring some of the most powerful voices in America to the table. We don't just ask the questions, you have to go deeper. We try to understand what's at the heart of the issue we're talking about, to then come forward with solutions.
Face the Nation on CBS.
The justices ruled that Harvard and the University of North Carolina violated the Constitution.
In the aftermath of the Supreme Court decision to end affirmative action in college admissions, uncertainty sets in for some students of color.
Affirmative action really gave us an equal opportunity.
CBS Reports explores the historic decision and what it means for those chasing an opportunity to change their lives.
I knew that college was the ticket to break this cycle.
The end of affirmative action, now streaming on the free CBS News app.
America Decides is your place for fact-based, unbiased reporting.
At the White House, at the Capitol, on the campaign trail.
What do you say to those in your party?
Any cracks in the Republican Party?
Our reporters and our anchors travel the country talking to voters like you
about the issues that matter most.
Immigration is really a factor right now
that are going to be driving your decisions.
What would you say to those who say, look, that's just democracy at work?
Listening to you and bringing your voice into our coverage.
I want a strong, proud America.
Is democracy on the ballot in 2024?
Let us help you decide.
America Decides on CBS News 24/7.
Stream our expanded one-hour program Monday through Thursday at 5 p.m. Eastern.
An original documentary from CBS Reports.
AI is among the most world-changing technologies ever.
Curing diseases, scientific breakthroughs, making lives better.
They can help us with medical discoveries, scientific discoveries, doing better agriculture, having cures for things like Alzheimer's.
It's also going to really transform the way we work.
The uplifting potential of artificial intelligence is limitless.
It gives you a friend, somebody to chat with 24/7 that is non-judgmental. He makes me feel loved and desired.
And so are its downfalls.
The problem with all this AI is that it's unpredictable and uncontrollable. The choices we make now will have lasting effects for decades, maybe even centuries.
The ChatGPT revolution, now streaming on the free CBS News app.
We are about to see American weapons in the hands of Mexican cartels.
A gun pipeline to Mexico.
We are arming the cartels.
100%, no doubt about it.
Happening right under our noses.
Who's doing something about this? Nobody.
A CBS Reports exclusive.
Most Americans have no idea that we are effectively arming the enemy next door.
This is the story the American people need to know.
Arming cartels. Now streaming on the free CBS News app.
Welcome back to America Decides. President Biden went on the airwaves to advocate for the vice president. That's no real surprise. He was asked, this is kind of interesting, what advice he gave her.
Be herself. Look, she is smart as hell, number one. Yeah. She's tough. She was a first-rate prosecutor. She is a United States senator of significant consequence. And as vice president, there wasn't a single thing that I did that she couldn't do. And so I was able to delegate her responsibility on everything from foreign policy to domestic policy.
We're going to bring in our political panel, Nancy Cook and Sabrina Rodriguez. Nancy is a senior national political correspondent for Bloomberg News. Sabrina is a national politics reporter for The Washington Post. So we just brought our audience brand new numbers from Georgia. We have brand new sound from the vice president in an interview that she did earlier today with Stephanie Ruhle at MSNBC. They've released one clip about that, from that interview. It's about tariffs. Let's take a little look at that.
Tariffs aren't unique to President Trump. President Biden has tariffs in place. He's actually looking to potentially implement more. Where do you come out on? Is there a good tariff, a bad tariff?
Well, part of it is you don't just throw around the idea of just tariffs across the board, and that's part of the problem with Donald Trump. Frankly, I'm going to, and I say this in all sincerity, he's just not very serious about how he thinks about some of these issues.
So, your reaction, Nancy Cook, you have a kind of an expertise built out over a career in the economic sphere and politics. Economics, we all know, will be a big part of this. Democrats are asking, urging the vice president to sharpen her economic message, get more specific, lean into it a little bit more. This is part of that conversation, clearly.
Yeah, I mean, she didn't really answer the question. And she certainly, and the Biden administration, to be fair, has kept the Trump tariffs in place and even doubled down on some of them. And so what I've seen her doing is she didn't answer the question. What she did was instead attack Trump. And that's what we saw with her doing in the debate as well. She said that he wasn't serious, sort of called into question his temperament and character. And that has really been her MO in this presidential race. Instead of sort of trying to make as much of a policy contrast, particularly on economic issues, she has been going after him personally, after his felony convictions, after his behavior, his temperament, and that's what we saw her do in that interview. To be fair, late this afternoon, her campaign did release an 86-page economic blueprint. I have not had the chance to look through the whole thing.
All 86 pages.
Some light bedtime reading.
Right.
And so I do think they are trying to sort of put a little bit more detail behind some of her economic ideas, just because people are demanding it.
Right.
But she also really, her message is that Trump is not fit to be president, and that's what she's going to keep hammering home.
Sabrina, this brings up an interesting point, because when you talk to Trump folks, as I do, and I know you do, all of us do at this table, they will say, look, she doesn't answer the questions put to her, and she constantly harangues former President Trump, and voters still don't know who she is or what she is. Is that a strategy they can rely on going forward?
I mean, it's what they've leaned on so far. And the reality is, when you talk to the Harris campaign folks, they'll bring up, well, does he really answer the question? Does he really get into, the nuts and bolts of what exactly he would do in terms of the economy?
But the fact is, Trump is a known commodity. Harris isn't. And the polling data shows that. People are less certain about what she is or what her intentions are or what her sort of foundational principles are. Dislike or like Trump, people have a pretty good sense of those.
Oh, no question about it. I mean, they're really leaning into she needs to be introducing herself to the American people. She needs to be showing that she takes these issues seriously. And part of her messaging on the economy has been sort of leaning into a personal appeal as well, talking about, well, I can actually provide for you because I understand you. And her talking about coming up in the middle class and really understanding, workers and understanding that struggle in a way that Donald Trump Trump doesn't. And we do see that from when she, joined the race, she has improved significantly on the economy. I mean,
relationship to former President Trump, yes.
Absolutely.
The gap has narrowed. He's still leading, but the gap has narrowed.
The gap has narrowed, which is a positive for her. And what her campaign is sort of saying is the more she talks about it, the better she is doing on this. And more so that you talk to voters and they're becoming increasingly familiar with her. But there is still that doubt because in part, I mean, Kamala Harris has a background as a politician, as a prosecutor, and Donald Trump does have this branding that has worked well for him of this businessman, this successful, businessman persona that can run this country like a business. And that does appeal with a lot of people.
Nancy, in our Georgia data, one of the questions we asked was, have wages kept up with inflation? Vast majority of people in Georgia said no. Even though statistically, it's somewhat close. Not that wages have overstripped and compensated in all respects for inflation, but it's much closer than people perceive. Still an advantage for Trump.
Yeah, that remains really the big problem for Harris, is that even though several markers of the economy are doing much better, we saw the Federal Reserve cut interest rates last week. Inflation is abating. People's wages have seen an increase. Unemployment remains low. People still feel bad about the economy, even if their own personal economic picture is not horrible. And that sort of pessimistic sense of the economy has pervaded this election. And I think definitely is why the race is so close and why Trump is running so neck and neck with Harris.
Sabrina, the so-called vibe session, the idea that even though you might be personally, and our data shows this nationally, people feel, I'm okay, but I'm pessimistic about the future. That's sort of the disconnect.
100%. I mean, if we all collectively had $1 for every time we talked to someone that said, I don't like the way he speaks, but right. Or, I'm not voting for him because I think he's a great person, but, and then the answer afterwards is about the economy. I mean, that is the number one thing that she needs to penetrate between now and Election Day, is really selling herself as, I'm a good person and I can handle the economy. And that's the challenge she has that really lies ahead, and that Donald Trump still gets to drive home, regardless of what he says, regardless of who he offends, is still that perception that he understands and that he is actually going to improve the economy.
And that path to breaking through might begin with answering the question posed to you in the first place. Nancy Cook and Sabrina Rodriguez, that's not your problem. You do it exceptionally well. Kamala Harris might want to think about that. Just saying. President of Finland pledges more support for Ukraine. Our Ouija Jang one-on-one interview. That's next, right here on America Decides.
Go to the ends of the earth.
Right now. We got something crazy.
And reach for the stars.
Here we are. Time.
Yes, it's my comeback.
Hey, this is pretty fun. But wait, there's more.
Experience thought-provoking,
Welcome to the idea of being a human being.
innovative, and truly original reporting.
Look through a telescope and go, wow.
Because there's always something new under the sun on CBS Sunday morning.
At this moment, terrorists could be plotting another attack.
9/11 triggered a counter-terrorist system that included a secret database.
This person needs a closer look.
A growing list of nearly 2 million people, including some Americans who say they're innocent.
For 1 hour flight, I have to spend 6 hours to go and come back.
CBS Reports explores the system, the people responsible for it, and those pushing for change.
I'm not fighting against them. I'm fighting for them to do the right thing.
The Watch List, now streaming on the free CBS News app.
Don't miss true crime anytime you want, anywhere you go. With the 48 Hours podcast. Real crimes, real lives, real justice.
There's some questions that have to be asked and need to be answered.
Listen to 48 Hours on Apple Podcasts.
An original documentary from CBS Reports.
Imagine yourself in Manhattan with no police, no army, no mayor.
The people of Haiti stare down poverty, corruption, natural disasters, and violence.
90% of the guns that are used by gangs in Haiti are American guns.
But with an unbreakable spirit and eternal optimism.
There are days where I cry, but we can't be discouraged. We still believe in Haiti.
They're still able to look ahead with hope.
Haiti is on the brink of transformation, a radical shift. Haitians are coming together and saying things must change.
Fighting for Haiti, now streaming on the free CBS News app.
Hey there, welcome to The Uplift.
I thought she was a groom, and I stepped back and I went, oh, you're the queen. She's going to be with me every instant that I'm alive.
I just wanted to see if you'd go to Disneyland with me today.
I look over at him and he's smiling.
I'm going to remember that the rest of my life.
They told us when he was going to be born, he was only going to live for 30 minutes. It's really a miracle that he's with us today.
The Uplift. Stream now on the free CBS News app.
When you wake up in the morning, we want to be your go-to team.
On our places, bright, shiny faces.
I don't go to work in the morning. I go for coffee with my two good friends, and we talk about the world.
Your morning routine just got better. CBS Mornings.
A CBS News investigation. People looking for love, finding their life savings gone.
This could happen to anybody.
And sometimes losing their lives. Anything for love. Now streaming on the free CBS News app.
Welcome back to America Decides. Ukrainian President Zelensky will be in Washington tomorrow with meetings with President Biden and Vice President Harris on his schedule, also meeting probably with some lawmakers. All this after he addressed the General Assembly today. Here's a bit of what President Zelensky said.
It not only ignores reality, but also gives Putin the political space to continue the war and pressure the world to bring more nations under control. Any parallel or alternative attempts to seek peace are, in fact, efforts to achieve a lull instead of an end to the war.
Arwija Jang is covering the General Assembly. Earlier today, she spoke to the leader of one of NATO's newest member countries, Finland, and President Alexander Stubb. Let's listen.
First, I want to ask you, since Finland joined NATO, do your people feel safer? How has the level of reassurance changed?
Well, we do feel safer, but the truth is that we also have a very strong defense ourselves, and that's why we became NATO members extremely fast. We have one of the largest militaries in Europe, and I think NATO wanted us because if you double your border with Russia, it's better to have a country that is quite serious about its defense. We feel very secure and safe, no problem.
What can you tell us about the 2 NATO bases that are reportedly in Finland?
Well, what we're trying to do right now is to integrate ourselves into NATO, and that means that first of all we're under Norfolk together with the other Nordic countries, and then we have 2 components. One is a land component, and the other one are these FLFs, forward land forces. And we haven't decided yet where they're going to go, but we're talking more on a rotational basis. So we're not talking about a base with 5,000 soldiers. We are talking, you know, of tens of officers, and then we look at it how it is structured within the next year or 2.
Obviously, we heard from President Zelensky today. He continues to call for NATO allies to support his request to use long-range missiles deeper into Russia. You agree with him that that is the right approach. What is your message to President Biden, who has so far been resistant?
My message to all of our allies is to allow Ukraine to fight this war against Russia with both hands. Now it has one hand behind its back. Finland has absolutely no restrictions on what kind of weapons and which range Ukraine can use in Russia, as long as 2 things are met. It's for defense purposes and it is within the framework of international law. So I am actually quite hopeful that when Zelensky presents his victory plan to President Joe Biden tomorrow, there should be, hopefully, some news that gives a little alleviation to the way in which Ukraine is fighting the war.
Have you personally had a conversation with President Biden about that?
I haven't about this, no. I've talked with him about many other things, but I did speak about this particular issue with both Zelensky and in passing with Foreign Secretary of State Blinken.
And then finally, just today, President Biden, during an interview, warned that if the former president, Donald Trump, were to win in November, that would be the end of NATO. Do you agree with that?
Well, I don't take issue in the American elections. I am in no position to do that. And I, as President of Finland, will get along with whichever president is elected for the United States. I do believe that the United States will stay committed to NATO and to Europe, because if it wants to retain its position, maintain its position as a superpower, it needs allies, and 32 of those allies are in NATO.
But you have heard what the former president has said before about NATO. Do you take any of it, seriously?
Well, I take at least one thing very seriously, and that is defense expenditure. And I think he's been right on that. So he has, in many ways, with his language, which is quite rough at times, forced a lot of the allies to increase their defense spending up to 2%. Remember that in 2014, there were only 3 allies that reached that goal. Now we're 23. So on that particular issue, I think he's right. And I hope that were he to be elected again, he would see the benefit of the alliance, not least in keeping Europe secure, and also with his ambitions that he might have in the Pacific.
Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you.
Appreciate your time.
California is seen as a leader when it comes to progressive policy. So why are some California Democrats taking money from big oil and voting against some environmental laws? That's next. You're streaming America Decides.
These are the stories
1, 2, 3, go!
of We the People.
We're trying to generate our own hope.
It's a huge deal.
I'm enabling them to feel valued.
Eye on America, weeknights on the CBS Evening News with Norah O'Donnell.
I had progressively fallen deeper into the world of online sports betting.
The risk is the rush.
What do you think is driving the spike in popularity?
I think it's legality.
If it's legal, I'm going to use it. There are ways to bet when you are 18.
We've created an epidemic of child gambling. You can't walk into a male dormitory in a college campus without sports betting happening. It's America's most neglected problem.
I used sports betting as a way to escape, when in reality, I'm choosing self-destruction. Whatever I had left, it was gone.
The purpose of the industry is to get you to play to extinction. And that means until all your money is gone.
Go to the ends of the earth. Reach for the stars.
Yeah, I just took off. That kind of thing.
Oh, that's pretty good. Because there's always something new under the sun on CBS Sunday morning.
America Decides is your place for fact-based, unbiased reporting.
At the White House, at the Capitol, on the campaign trail. What do you say to those in your party?
Any cracks in the Republican Party?
Our reporters and our anchors travel the country talking to voters like you
about the issues that matter most.
Immigration is really a factor right now
that are going to be driving your decisions.
What would you say to those who say, look, that's just democracy at work?
Listening to you and bringing your voice into our coverage.
I want a strong, proud America.
Is democracy on the ballot in 2024?
Let us help you decide.
America Decides. Stream our expanded one-hour program Monday through Thursday at 5 p.m. Eastern.
Exclusively on CBS News 24/7, the streaming home of CBS News.
People with developmental disabilities were once sequestered by the hundreds of thousands in institutions.
Many of our fellow citizens are suffering tremendously because lack of attention, lack of imagination, lack of adequate manpower.
Disability activists have since torn down barriers blocking them from living at home or in the community.
We conclude that Title II of the ADA requires states to provide community-based treatment for persons with mental disabilities.
But of the 16,000 people who remain in state-operated institutions, half are in 5 states, and Illinois is one of them.
I don't want to live in the institution. It makes me feel discriminated against.
Do you think there are people living in institutions in Illinois that don't need to be living there?
Yeah, because they're proving it as soon as they get out.
Welcome back to America Decides. While appearing at the UN General Assembly yesterday, President Biden touted his administration's work on addressing climate change. In California, lawmakers have often been ahead of the federal government when it comes to pushing climate policy, although they have not always been aligned on this substantive issue. CBS News California investigative correspondent Julie Watts joins us now from right outside the Capitol in Sacramento. It's good to see you, Julie. If there's any state, and I'm a native Californian, I know a little bit about this, where elected officials and the public are more or less aligned on the issue of climate change, it's California. Isn't that correct?
Yeah, absolutely. You know, polling shows that the majority of Californians are concerned about climate change, and you'd be hard-pressed to find someone in that building who would identify as a climate denier, at least an elected official in that building who would identify as a climate denier. But that does not mean that California lawmakers vote in favor of environmental legislation 100% of the time. In fact, we recently found about 27% of votes from Democratic lawmakers in California's capital were against environmental legislation.
And what would be the reasons for these lawmakers, in particular the Democrats you just mentioned, to either be against or not embracing of all manner of climate legislation?
Yeah, you hit the nail on the head there. In some cases, they just withhold their vote. They don't vote against. That's considered a polite no here in California. So, I mean, Major, you know this, but, you know, folks at home may not. California is a leader, obviously, in environmental policies and in green energy policies. A lot of what they are debating in D.C. is already law here in California. Cap and trade, for instance, has been law here for years, right? So the policies being debated inside California's capital, those are often novel, right? They're untested in some ways. And so there is concern among California lawmakers that there may be unintended consequences for moving too fast. They point to gas prices, which are the highest in the nation here in California, in part because of some of our environmental legislation. And they also point to jobs. This comes as a surprise to many, but California is among the largest oil producers and refiners in the country, and that accounts for a lot of jobs. So we tracked down a couple of the lawmakers that are most often associated with the oil and gas industry, and we asked them to explain their votes. Here's what they said. How do you explain your vote on these bills?
Well, for me, I always look at the unintended consequences. Not every community can afford whatever policy we pass out here, not because they don't want to or they're climate deniers, it's because they just can't afford it.
What do you say to your constituents who support climate change legislation, who want to reduce CO2 levels, and who see that you vote against these bills that have been billed as climate change reducers?
I'd say I'm on the same page as they are. I want to reduce carbon emissions. I am a believer of climate change, but we as legislators have to look at issues from all sides. We have to think about what's going to, keep our economy going, what's going to keep people employed.
So you can see economy is certainly top of mind inside this building and for many California voters right now.
There is an old saying in our business, Julie, you know it well, follow the money. Is it true that when you were looking into this, you discovered that Democrats, maybe to your surprise or maybe to our audience's surprise, with some regularity, accept money from the fossil fuel industry?
Yeah, overall, and I actually was surprised to find this, overall, California Democrats get more money from oil and gas than Republicans do in California. And that is not the case in Congress, right? That's unique to California. Now, it's likely because we have so many more Democrats here in California. We've got a Democratic supermajority. So just the sheer numbers, when you total it all, account for more money. But what's really interesting is we wanted to know, is that why they're voting against environmental legislation? So we analyzed, with the help of CalMatters and their digital democracy database, we analyzed more than 6,000 bill positions on over 100 bills related to oil and gas. And we looked at how everybody voted in every committee and on the floor. And we found there was not really a correlation between money and votes in favor of oil and gas. In fact, in some cases, people who did get money from oil and gas voted against their interests 100% of the time. So then we looked deeper at some of the other lobbies here in California, and I know you know this, but labor is probably the strongest influence inside California's capital, the labor unions, that is. Stick with me here, Major. Recently, we were looking at different studies analyzing how much the jobs pay here, right? Fossil fuel jobs, according to recent surveys, pay more and have better benefits in California than many of the clean energy jobs do. That also is not the case across the rest of the country. That's the case here. So you've got labor who are very supportive of the oil and gas industry because it means jobs. And when we looked at the bills, we found that those bills where labor was aligned with oil and gas were the ones that the majority of lawmakers did vote in favor, or at least in alignment with oil and gas. Bottom line, oil and gas has a much better track record on bills when they can team up with labor on those bills in California.
Connecting all the dots and seeing through some of the assumptions. Julie Watts, thank you very much. Now back to the presidential election. Pop singer Chappell Roan says she will vote for Vice President Kamala Harris. This after receiving some harsh criticism for saying she was reluctant to endorse a candidate in the 2024 presidential race. Roan has taken to TikTok not once but twice in the past 2 days to defend this position.
No, I'm not voting for Trump. And yes, I will always question those in power and those making decisions over other people. I'm sorry that you fell for the clickbait.
The Hot to Go singer acknowledged that she doesn't agree with how the Democratic Party has dealt with the war in Gaza, while also speaking out against Republican policies. Roan has regularly advocated for trans rights. That does it for today. We will be back with another edition of America Decides tomorrow at 5 p.m. Eastern. The Daily Report with John Dickerson starts right now.
Welcome to the Daily Report for September 25th, 2024. I'm John Dickerson. The president of Ukraine pleads with the United Nations for attention